immediately the Wall Street crash hit a section of the German ruling class, particularly some of the most dynamic sections of I.G. Farben, for one, which up until then had supported, if anything, liberal politicians, moved towards the idea of a much more aggressive imperialist project looking for domination. And again, that radicalisation in the German ruling class, which is begins to chime, of course, with what Adolf Hitler is also arguing and had argued clear. But the problem with trying to create a series of right-wing, strong governments around various people, a man called Brüning, who actually did the most damage in terms of working class living standards. The fallen living standards predate Hitler. His government was the one that introduced real wage cuts and so on. Then a man called von Papen, and then a man called Schleier, I think the pronunciation, I'm sorry, pronunciation correct, who's connected really as the army's man in the final analysis. The problem was they did not have sufficient political and popular support in the country to follow the project through. And the Reichstag was becoming more and more polarised, and in a situation where those governments couldn't rely on votes, as both the Nazis were increasing their strength and the communists were increasing their strength, the parliamentary game was becoming much more difficult. And increasingly, actually, they have found themselves being drawn towards getting the Social Democrats to have to support them in getting legislation and activity through, even though the legislation and acts were intensely working class. What was happening here, I'd say, was radicalisation, and a second radicalisation was a section of the middle class who had previously voted for centre or liberal parties, faced with an overwhelming destruction of the living standards, the mortgages being failing to keep the mortgages, the houses being repossessed, the collapse of small business, the professions finding their income collapsing, not being able to afford to send their sons to university. A radicalisation taking place among sections of among the middle class, who were actually quite, how do you want to say, jealous of those still in work, the working class still in work. Because the sections of the working class still in work could defend their living standards. Those people were becoming more resentful of the working class and becoming radicalising. And it was that group which, of course, provided the basis for the Nazi Party. Hitler could offer disaffected middle-class voters convenient scapegoats. He did not attack capitalism, and I think it's important to say this, but he attacked alien capitalism. In other words, Jewish capitalism. And when he talked about finance capital, he talked about finance capital as essentially being Jewish finance capital. And he would attack Wall Street as being controlled by the Jews, the people responsible for the squeeze on the German economy, which is making it a disaster. He promised to restore Germany as a world power and to destroy the Bolshevik threat. But that, he meant not just the destruction of the powerful German Communist Party, but also the Social Democratic Party as well. For him, the Bolshevik threat was the whole working class. And he had a mass membership and a paramilitary wing which could deploy tens of thousands of stormtroopers to battle the left on the streets. The paramilitary street marches and rallies provided a sense of pride to impoverished middle-class people, and even some unemployed workers whose lives had been destroyed. Leon Trotsky, the exiled Russian revolutionary, argued fascism unites and arms the scattered masses. Out of human dust, it organises combat detachments. It thus gives the petty bourgeoisie the illusion of being an independent force. It began to imagine that it really could command the state. It's not surprising these illusions and hopes turn the head of the petty bourgeoisie. And, you know, what the message was really being given to the membership, particularly the stormtroopers of the Nazi Party, was this was going to be a fundamental change. You would be able to exercise power in Germany, the old order would be swept away. So there's different messages being seen here, particularly as the radicalisation of big business led them to make contact with Hitler towards the close of 1932. Hitler was promising a free market, that if he was given political power in Germany, he would guarantee the bosses economic freedom to make profits and squeeze the workforce. And he was promising to destroy the welfare state and unemployment benefit and so on in Germany, and to begin the process of an expansion into Eastern Europe. And that's why a meeting of industrialists in the close of 1932, big business began moving towards the idea that Hitler should be brought into government. Initially, the idea was he should be part of a second in command in the government, that they would still try and find some respectable right-winger to come through. What began to shift that was a sense of unease among the ruling class that the Nazi support was slipping away. An unease shared by both Hitler and Goebbels, who was aware that if they couldn't, having built a mass membership, if they didn't achieve power, they were in the problematic situation of sustaining this whole project. The German ruling class themselves were becoming increasingly worried that if the Nazis didn't achieve power, the slip in support would lead to a crisis in their membership, and actually it was not infeasible in their belief that sections of that membership could begin to move back to the left, to look to the left as an alternative. They were worried about the growing support of the communists. And it was becoming a rush in December, January 1931 to bring 33 to bring Hitler into office to help sustain the Nazis and the stormtroopers, because by this stage the ruling class was becoming very worried and believed that the German army and German police were no longer capable of dealing with a revolutionary situation. Again, remember in 1919, the German ruling class had relied on paramilitary formations independent of the army to smash the revolution, the Freikorps. So what they were looking for was to use the Nazis in very much that the same way to do it. And as I say, big business moved forward. Now I'm stressing all this just for one reason, that if you read a whole series of books in current fascist studies, there is a tendency, repeated tendency, to turn around and say the Marxist analysis of fascism is that fascism is a tool of finance capital or big business. End of story. Now that isn't the Marxist definition of capital. That was actually Stalin's definition, echoing some earlier formulations actually of Zinoviev, but it was a Stalinist argument. Trotsky and others were arguing that fascism was a genuine independent mass movement. That was its attraction actually to the ruling class, in a sense, that it could deploy tens of thousands of people on the streets. It was an autonomous movement, and the ruling class, it wasn't just simply the ruling class calling the shots in here. And it's important to say that the Third Reich, when it was created in a compromise between different power bases. Private capitalism, the army, and the Nazi Party. I haven't got time to go into this, but the dynamic of the Third Reich, particularly under wartime conditions, was the Nazi Party and the SS would, if you like, assume more and more power within that arrangement and contaminate the other two elements, the army and big capitalism, involve them in the Holocaust. Because essentially the whole imperialist project that Hitler unleashed, they were supporting, or they didn't understand the genocidal concepts that Hitler would have in. But that's the detractor. It's important for us to say that we do not just simply argue that fascism is a product of capitalism. You know, there was a bargain made here, and it was relatively late on that big business really began to move towards the option of bringing Hitler into power. And of course, you know, Hitler not only wanted to break the left and to break the unions, as I said, a major ambition of the ruling class. He went and not only wanted to carve out an empire in Central and Eastern Europe, he had a vision which was going further. I think, you know, ultimately in a crazed world, essentially it was complete global domination. Again, worth saying that for Hitler, hegemony of Western Europe was important, but hegemony of Europe was a staging post for a further war. That first war would probably have been against Britain if that had survived the thing in terms of the empire, but ultimately he understood it was war with America. And America was very much part of Hitler's idea, and he kind of thought in his own Darwinian way that Germany was in a race with the United States of America, and the United States had certain advantages as far as Hitler was concerned. So he was a project to the farm, tied in with his genocidal concept in terms of that. You know, so he was sworn in as a Chancellor. Again, important to see, he was not elected, and the left vote held up under rigged elections after Hitler had taken power. It's again important to say that. There is no evidence for the working class support for the left collapsing. He was appointed Chancellor in the 30th of January 1933 in a government in which initially the Nazis were a minority. The ruling class could believe that their own people like von Papen, etc., would tame Hitler and bring him under their control. And there was no response from the left in terms of the Nazis taking power. And I think it's then, at this stage, this is where the question of inevitability of Hitler could take power.